Well, hello. This is Reverend Joanne, and thank you for joining us for Holy Grounds. And I'm here with Lucia Martin. Lucia is the chair of the Children's Faith Formation Commission and a studier of Scripture and just an all-around good friend. So thank you for joining me, Lucia, today from
I'm glad to be here.
far-flung places.
Yes.
I'm in Baltimore, and you are?
In Litchfield Beach, South Carolina, visiting family.
Very good. So the wonders of technology do serve us.
Yes,
from
they
time
do.
to time. So I'm going to ask you to read the scripture reading. This is the gospel for this coming Sunday, and then we'll just have a little discussion about it.
Okay, sounds good. Let me put my glasses on so I can see. So this is Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I would be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
Thank you. That's such a great story, and so much going on in that story. And I know that you shared with me that the Women's Bible Study has been talking about some of the women's voices in the Bible. So tell me a little bit about what captures your attention in that story, what or who captures your attention.
Well, it's interesting because they both are familiar stories. the two stories that are going on in this one complete story. But I don't think I remembered until I read it this time that they made one story, that it all happened in one event. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because here you have this woman who for years and years and years has had this illness that she's not been able to be cured of. And then here you have this little girl who all of a sudden has an illness. So you've got two different female characters, two totally different situations, and yet Jesus is involved and heals both of them. You know, I was telling you, we actually did a study of the woman in Women's Bible Study this year, and it was a very good conversation. But it's so interesting because at that time, my understanding is that women were not allowed to even come close to or touch the robes of men who were not relatives of theirs. So for this woman to reach out and touch Jesus's robe, I mean, that on its own was a real bold act, I think, you know?
Yes, it was. Touching his robe, not only touching his robe, but even the act of coming out in public by herself, apparently.
Yeah.
She is a person who is in pretty desperate straits, it sounds like. She's had this illness for a long time. She's seen many doctors. So we get the idea that perhaps she has some means, but that they have been depleted.
Yeah.
And she's alone.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, the fact that she is bleeding makes her unclean.
Right.
According to the purity laws. And so that makes her ostracized, essentially. She is marginalized and ostracized. So touching the robes, being out in public, being among people in a crowd where everyone's pressed together, all of those things were huge leaps, huge crossings of boundaries that this woman makes. And I think we have to think about her courage, and also her sense that she seems pretty confident that if she just touches Jesus's robe, something will happen.
Yeah, she had to have had pretty strong faith in that in order to take all those risks, you know?
Yes.
And then the disciples, Jesus says, "Who touched me?" You know, and she's probably, because she knew, you know, according to the gospeler, that she was cured. So it sounds like immediately she was cured, and she knew, she felt the healing flow into her.
Yes.
And Jesus says, "Who touched me?" She probably was surprised that he knew that she had touched his robe.
Yeah.
And then the disciples are looking around. If it were me, I might have kind of gone, "Oh, I got away with that one," you know.
Right.
But then to have the faith in Jesus that nothing bad would happen to her as a result of that, you know, and coming and thanking him.
Yes.
Is kind of amazing.
It's interesting that she felt a change immediately. And that sort of immediate action is a hallmark of Mark's gospel. A lot of things happen that way immediately. But also Jesus felt the power go out of him, it said. So it definitely was an exchange that both of them noticed. Immediately.
Yeah, that's a very vivid little description in that paragraph about what happened. You know, I don't remember reading or hearing too much how that felt to Jesus or to the people that it happened to, just that he lays his hands on and they're cured often. But this kind of talks about what that might have felt like. So it's interesting that way.
Sounds almost like a current or some energy or
Yeah,
something like that
yeah.
exchanging.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Well, let's think about the little girl for a second.
yeah. I was just thinking
There's
about that.
there's an interesting little detail in the story that I always think about. We know at the beginning that the woman has been ill or suffering for 12 years.
Mhm.
And then sort of stuck at the end of the story with the little girl, it's even in parentheses.
Yeah.
She was 12 years of age.
Oh,
So I always think what an interesting detail to include. And it
Yeah.
makes me think about sort of their life experiences and
mhm.
that this woman had been suffering and again marginalized and seen as unclean and seen as not really part of society
Mhm.
for the entire lifespan of this little girl
Mhm.
who was we have to think a little bit perhaps somewhat privileged. Her father
Mhm.
was a leader of the synagogue and he came speaking to Jesus on her behalf.
Right.
Obviously, she could not do that herself.
Mhm.
But I just think about that pairing of these two people,
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't.
and the lifespans and the sort of stations in life that they are
Mhm.
presented in.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that 12-year thing, although I did notice it. But sometimes it seems like in the Bible, 12 years or 12 months or whatever is kind of a standard. Yeah, 12 apostles.
Yes, it is. It is one of those important numbers. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. But whenever that story, I always think about what it would be like to be that father, to have gone and asked Jesus, and Jesus was coming. So, maybe he was feeling hopeful and, thinking that things were going to be okay. And then to have somebody come up to him before they get there and say, don't even bother with it. She's already dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
so,
then,
yeah.
I mean, what a turn of events and another turn of events.
Right.
Very stressful and also amazing.
Right. Yeah. And Jesus to say, she's not dead, she's just sleeping, and it besides her and Lazarus, are there other stories in the Gospels about Jesus raising people from the dead? Or are they the two? I can't think of another.
Those are probably the two that come to mind most immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about Martha and Mary in Bible study, we talked about the fact that for this little girl, she had just died and Jesus raised her. But when he raised Lazarus, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days already.
Yes.
So, and what was God's purpose in that?
Right.
So,
and what was the effect, I think, on those who were remaining?
Right.
It's
Right.
there's a lot there as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering about sort of the, if we look at this story as a whole, and Jesus is making his way along, he's crossed over the lake again, and
Right.
that tells us that he's on the move,
Right.
and he's often crossing societal boundaries, and so it starts out that he's going to go and try and heal this little girl, but then this woman comes in and it sort of interrupts for a moment, but yet both of the people that are in the story were in need of healing, and so I think there's a lesson there, I think, for us to think about when we maybe feel like we get interrupted, or someone or something crosses our path that is unexpected. And like, what is that trying to tell us?
Right.
I think especially for us to pay attention to who crosses our path, and to look for those unexpected encounters.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Yeah, because you never know what'll come of it.
You never know what'll come. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Either for you or for the other person.
That's right.
You know.
Do you have an example that you can think of that you've experienced?
You know, I can't think of anything. I think daily, day to day, I'm aware of when I have interactions with people. And if you think about it, if you have an interaction with someone that you don't know, say for example, at the grocery store, and it's a positive one, it kind of sets the tone for the day. And if it's a negative one, it kind of can set the tone for the day. So, you know, day-to-day interactions, I think, for me, it's important for me to feel like I'm somehow sending out positive ripples instead of negative ripples.
Yeah.
But I couldn't think of an example that just kind of stuck in my mind.
Yeah. That's a good way to think about how to go about our day, and being aware of how we affect people,
Right.
and vice versa.
Right.
So,
I mean, you never know when somebody might have had just an awful morning and you're passing by them, and now that we're vaccinated and can occasionally have a mask off our face, you know, a smile and a good morning or just an acknowledgement of someone can really kind of change the pattern of a day for a person, I think. I know it does for me when that happens.
yeah, I think that's like that saying, always we begin again. Every day we have the opportunity to start over and start fresh. And that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
So thank you for spending the time to talk about this wonderful story, Lucia.
Oh, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
I enjoyed it too. I hope you have safe travels whenever you are coming back to Maryland. And I hope to see you all on Sunday. We'll be reading this gospel on Sunday. I will be live in the historic church at St. John's at 8:30, and we will also be live streaming at 10:15. So until then, we'll see you on Sunday.